right?
Good, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. It's about to begin broadcasting on YouTube, and then I'll hit the broadcast button here. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and hit broadcast so folks can kind of trickle in. Hello and welcome everyone. We're going to get started in just a minute or two, but we're going to go ahead and give folks another minute or so to get logged on.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our third annual Spectrum Conference. My name is Joseph Storch. I serve as an associate counsel here in the Suny Office of General Counsel. I use he and him, and I am deeply privileged to welcome you here to this great conference. Spectrum is part of a series of trainings and programs that are developed by an incredible group that we have here at the State University of New York. I am so proud of the work that they do every day, and we are especially grateful for this conference to our major sponsors, Suny, the Suny Student Conduct Institute, and the New York State Office of Victim Services, as well as a slew of partner sponsors from across the country. This work is hard, and the pandemic has made it harder. I want to start by recognizing the challenges that COVID-19 has placed on all of you. The horrific loss of life we have seen in New York and across our country, the overturning of every part of society, the requirement for many that they balance full-time parenting with full-time plus work and care for family members, the impact of new government relations on an already difficult summer. We want to acknowledge in particular the pain caused by abuse and harm to Black Americans, including today, those within the LGBTQI+ community and those not within the community. and the searing and continuing pain of racial injustice. We also want to acknowledge the pain and difficulties felt by new Americans and immigrants in this, our great nation of immigrants. Spectrum was supposed to be held live right at the end of Pride Month just a few weeks ago. Like so many things, it had to be postponed due to COVID-19. But our presidential co-chairs and our director, Elizabeth Brady, said separately and together that we must still host Spectrum. The work must go on. It is too important. The inaugural Spectrum brought 620 attendees to Suny from about half of the United States. Last year, we hosted 826. Because of the leadership of our presidential co-chairs, our next speaker, and the team, more than 1,600 people from 49 states and 4 Canadian provinces are registered to join us for this, only our third Spectrum conference. With my great thanks for her leadership and my deepest respect for the commitment and the work, it's my privilege to turn things over to our director of the conference and our MC, Elizabeth Brady. Elizabeth?
Thank you, Joe. Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Brady. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am so grateful to everyone who is here today, while not in person, in a joint commitment to reducing the impact of sexual and interpersonal violence against members of the LGBTQIA+ community. In spite of the extraordinary challenges over the past few months, I have continued to be amazed, although not surprised, by this unwavering commitment to creating safer, more inclusive campuses and communities demonstrated by the higher education professionals and service providers represented in attendance at this conference. COVID-19 has upended lives professionally and personally for all of us. Many of you in attendance at this conference have lost loved ones as a result of this pandemic, and our hearts are with you. At the same time, as campuses and organizations closed down, the primary concern expressed by colleagues was concern for our students. Many colleagues, through grief, the stress of working remotely, many juggling additional childcare responsibilities, still reached out to discuss COVID-19 and its consequences disproportionately impacting our already most marginalized students. With plans being put into action and outreach strategies being explored all at the same time, that we as professionals were personally trying to make sense of the world around us. Many SUNY Spectrum attendees, representing a diverse array of professional titles and fields, have been challenged time and time again over the past few months, rising to the occasion and going beyond any expectations with each new challenge thrown before us. Amid COVID-19, many of you worked tirelessly to understand complex, lengthy, and some would say problematic regulations and figured out ways to implement them within a very short period of time. Many folks responded to provide emotional and logistic support to international students feeling as though they may need to choose between health and education amid rapidly changing regulations. As our nation engaged in a national dialogue surrounding racial injustice and Black Lives Matter in particular, many of you stepped in to help facilitate conversations with colleagues and students, and also to support our Black, Indigenous students of color. While I can't personally understand the lived experience of our Black and Brown colleagues, I can acknowledge the additional emotional labor that so many have had to take on in addition to their day-to-day responsibilities. We see you and we appreciate you and we stand with you. These are just a few examples of the ways in which the folks in attendance at this conference have continued to rise to the occasion in supporting students. And I'm so grateful to each and every one of you for being here today and for all of the work that you do. Now with that, before we begin, I would like to share a few things. First, we are grateful to our major sponsors, the SUNY Student Conduct Institute and the New York State Office of Victim Services, and to a variety of other partner sponsors. Second, while we are disappointed that we are unable to be with everyone in person, we are hoping that we can increase participation and connections among registrants in a few ways. First, use our hashtag SUNY Spectrum or tag the SUNY's Got Your Back account over the course of the week to share your thoughts and experiences throughout Spectrum. Second, in an effort to create an ongoing dialogue and greater sense of community, we have created a Facebook workspace group for SUNY Spectrum attendees. You can use this space to share your thoughts and engage in conversations with colleagues across the country and Canada about what you hear today and ways to better support students during these times. If you haven't had a chance to join and need access to the group, please email spectrum@suny.edu and we will be glad to assist. Finally, Please note that we have closed captioning available, which can be turned on at the bottom of the screen. And with that, I'm excited and very pleased to welcome General Counsel-in-Charge from the State University of New York, Sandra Casey, to join us for some remarks.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Joe. On behalf of Governor Cuomo, the Suny Board of Trustees and its chair, Dr. Merrill Tisch, and our very new chancellor, Dr. Jim Malatras, and my colleagues on the executive leadership team at Suny, I am so pleased to add my warm welcome to you as we begin the third Suny Spectrum Conference. I'd like to particularly thank our 4 presidents, co-chairs, President Laliberte, Esterberg, Terenzio, and Young, and our Director of Sexual and Interpersonal Violence Prevention, Elizabeth Brady, for their leadership putting this conference together in such challenging times. The fact that we have drawn just over 1,600 attendees from across the US and Canada shows the deep importance of this issue, and we are grateful to the work you are all doing from sea to shining sea. My name is Sandra Casey. I serve as General Counsel-in-Charge at Suny, and I use she, her, and hers as my pronouns. The Office of General Counsel has been proud to support Spectrum and the innovative legal and policy thinking that has emanated from this conference, work that is aiding our students and community members across the country. We are truly leaders in this field. This year has certainly been an interesting one for legal developments affecting the LGBTQ+ community. You will hear about the impact of the Title IX final rule of the Bostick decision on employment rights under Title VII, on transgender students and athletics. You will hear from the authors of From Outlaws to In-Laws about the continuing evolution of the right to marry. You will hear of the additional legal and policy challenges to the work you are doing because of COVID-19. And I echo the sentiments of Elizabeth and Joe on the impact and the devastation of COVID-19. And I do send my condolences to all who have lost loved ones. This conference is so important to the university and to each of us. The work continues. As Dr. Martin Luther King wrote, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. So too here, we must continue the work day to day as we move towards a more just society for our LGBTQ+ students and community members. And with that, I turn it over to Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. I'd like to next introduce Elizabeth Cronin, Director of the New York State Office of Victim Services, and a wonderful partner to Suny and all of our anti-violence work, to offer some additional remarks.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Thanks for having me. I'm thrilled that Suny was able to offer the Spectrum Conference. We were very concerned about whether this was going to happen, and it's so necessary to have conferences like this dealing with the issues that the LGBTQI+ community have to negotiate. So my name is Elizabeth Cronin. I'm the director of the New York State Office of Victim Services. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am really proud that my agency has been a leader and sponsor of this conference for the last couple of years. We support the work that is being done by Suny and other colleges on behalf of vulnerable college students, but my agency also sees this issue more broadly. The Office of Victim Services, for those who are not familiar with it, is an executive level state agency that provides financial compensation to crime victims and funds victim assistance programs throughout the entire state of New York. So a victim can go to any victim assistance program that we fund and get assistance without any cost to them. Something else that we do is we provide funding for forensic sexual assault exams. So a person who has been the victim of a sexual assault can go to a hospital and get treatment free of cost to them, completely confidentially. We started getting involved with Suny right around the time of the governor's Enough is Enough initiative. And we have been working very closely about how to identify underserved victims and to figure out what is the best way to deliver information and services to them. And so to that end, we have worked really closely with Joe and with Elizabeth on developing the SUNY's Got Your Back program. It started off as a pretty small program with wonderful ideas. And we said, let's inject that with some money and expand the program. And at our conference last fall, we had, I think, the 100,000 SUNY's Got Your Back bag. And we've also partnered with SUNY to develop mirror clings, so information for victims or people who support victims who want to help them. We've put clings throughout the campus communities and places that students go. Of course, it was interesting timing with COVID because so many students were having to leave school. But these are ways that we are partnering with SUNY to try to figure out unique and innovative methods of reaching students and providing services to them. So we are very proud to be working with you on all of those initiatives, including on this conference. I just want to tell people who are listening, my agency is not unique, although we think we're very unique, but there are programs like mine everywhere in the United States. And I know we have 49 states represented here and Canada, and I can't wait for Canada to open so I can go visit again. But all states and territories have programs like this where you can get assistance, you can get services through any of these state organizations. So if you know someone who's a victim of a crime or you have been the victim of a crime, don't hesitate to reach out to the agency in your state, and they, like New York State's Office of Victim Services, will point you in the right direction for where to get assistance. We have been working very hard over the last few years since I've been with the agency to identify underserved populations, and the LGBTQI+ community is one that we have identified as being very underserved. And to that end, we have reached out to the community on many occasions, and in our latest request for proposal last year, we ended up funding more programs that work specifically for the community than ever before. And we're really proud of that fact, and we want to continue providing these services. So thank you so much, Elizabeth and Joe, for inviting me to open this leadership panel. And again, I'm a proud sponsor through my agency of the work that you are doing.
Thanks, Elizabeth. With that, we are really excited to formally introduce our President's Panel, and very, very grateful to Presidents Esterberg, Laliberte, Young, and Terenzio, who, since this program first started, and Joe and I had our very first meeting just on a whim about this conference idea that we was really just a shell of an idea. The amount of support and guidance and leadership overall has just been really overwhelming, and something that we are deeply grateful for. And your legacy and impact on this conference is definitely visible, and something that's shaped it overall. So with that, I'm pleased to hand it over to the four of you, and thank you so much.
Well, maybe I'll jump in first and express our appreciation, Elizabeth, to you and to Joe and to Sandra Casey for all of the support that they've showed for the work of ending or eradicating or mitigating the effects of violence against LGBTQI students. I have to say, I have never been prouder of SUNY than with the attempt to really think about how do we make sure that we provide services for some of our most vulnerable students. And I'm going to just kick it off by saying, as an openly gay president, but also as the parent of a trans child who's a senior at a SUNY institution, I'm feeling this on all kinds of sides. This pandemic has really affected all of us deeply. And when we think about the students that we serve, and the ways in which we've really tried to work hard to keep them safe over these last few months as this pandemic has raged throughout New York State. I think we've all had some pretty complicated feelings about safety and about how do we keep our queer students safe? How do we keep our students of color safe? How do we keep our poor and low income students safe when for so many of those students, the very safest place is to be on our campuses? So maybe I'm just going to start it off there and we can have some conversations about how can we work to try and keep our students safe in these really difficult and devastating times, given the students we serve and given the kinds of institutions that we represent.
Thanks, Kristin. I'll take it over from here. I'm Marion Terenzio. I go by she, her, hers. Thank you, Joe and Elizabeth and Sandra and all of you and those who are listening in. It's important. It's not one thing just to set up the conference. It's another thing to have active participants. So thank you all who are on. I want to add to what you just said, Kristin, and yet a little bit of a broader context as well. The one thing I think we would all say in this time of COVID, none of us were prepared. Actually, I walk around and I said, when people give me their suggestions, I said, okay, so you're an expert in pandemic. That's good. I'm glad to hear that and how we're going to move forward in that. And I say that because the one thing I've learned as a leader, and this will also have an impact on how we treat our students, we have to show compassion and empathy in particular. And as a matter of fact, when we first started to go remote in the spring, I kept saying to the faculty, put robust aside. It's not going to matter. It will be there, but show compassion. Make sure the students feel safe. Make sure that they are connecting with you in ways you probably didn't think you would have to. And that still resonates. And the importance of empathy and in particularly compassion that we all have to do. And that includes the students who may not feel so marginalized because they too have to be in the space with us to help all of us. The other thing I want to add to that is this whole notion of politics. I've been back and forth on that because I too am an openly gay president. And I was told years ago, the personal is political. And I talked about this last year and I pushed against it. But I want to say we have to own it today in ways we haven't thought about, because one definition of politics is the public good. The other definition is you're political only if what the politicians are talking about are a part of your experience. What haven't we talked about? Health, Title IX, the American Affordable Care Act, immigration, everything I'm about, everything we're all about is so highly political now. We must get back into that space and own it with respect and the dignity it deserves. The only other thing I would add to that is one thing that really struck me through all of this is all of the policies and structures on my campus that are all born from something that is not actually from dignity and respect or taking so many people into account. And that's where I want to go next too, is what Kristin was saying is I am starting what we call an administrative conference and looking at policies and practices that were based on structures we thought were just fine, and they're not. So the work we have to do in the heavy lifting has to start immediately. So I'll stop there. And thanks, Kristin, for starting the conversation.
I'm Michael Laliberte. I am the president of SUNY Delhi. I've been president now. This is my 5th year. Also an openly gay president. And I'm really, I think this year, looking at how we can help with the mental health issues that are happening. So many of our students have faced issues because of COVID-19, but I think when you also couple that with identity issues and returning to a place that may or may not have been supportive. I've known of students who have, in their own words, felt like they've been forced into the closet or back into the closet or into a situation that is not the most supportive for them. For them to be coming back to campuses, we're in the process of returning our students, many of our students to campus. Will have probably half of the number of students we've had last semester, but I know some of those students coming back are coming back because this is a safe place for them. And not necessarily because their classes will be here on campus. Some of them will be taking all their classes online, but it was important for them to be in a safe environment. I don't know what impact these students would have, what impact this pandemic has had on those students, what type of support they'll need to be here. And I also, going back to what Marion had said about policies, looking at our policies, are we really ready to take on students 12 months of the year? If this is a safe place for them, do we have policies in place to allow that to happen that is also not going to be cost prohibitive? How can we create environments, whether it's here on our campus or within our communities, that are supporting students who are either transitioning their gender or who are just come out and are not being supported at home or just feel more comfortable here? And I think that will help us to look at our community in a different way, in a way that isn't going at 15 weeks. I think the pandemic has made us think about that differently, how our academic year fits into the rest of the year and how we're going to need to adapt and change in order to meet the needs of our changing populations. Kristin?
Good afternoon, everyone, and I know thanks for heralding our direction, but I want to also, give thanks to Suny for supporting this conference and the sponsors, and just for the chance to be with my colleagues and learn already and be inspired by their comments as we support each other. Being a president of a community college, and in the state of New York, the majority of community colleges do have relationships with residence halls. So many community college presidents have some students in residence, certainly not all students in residence, but some students, but SUNY Orange is not one of those colleges. So, I'm entering my 6th year of being president. So I'm accustomed to thinking of our LGBTQI students coming to college and not being in residence, and thinking of what is their safe space on our campus when they're commuting back and forth. And I too, like my colleagues, am an openly gay president myself, and now unabashedly fully a generation removed from that experience, and thinking, well, heck, if it took me 3 years and 1 month to get my act together and figure out my story, being some distance away from my family of origin, how is it for our students on our campus who may only be 5 or 10 or 15 miles away from their family of origin, in classes with students that maybe they went to high school with, or cousins, or their coworkers, or someone who works with their parents. Creating a space on a community college campus is very different. And now we have the added challenge, like many community colleges across the nation in the state of New York, we have made the decision to, most of our classes are remote. Today is the first day of class at SUNY Orange, as witnessed by the blazing orange jacket celebrating the first day of class. I am not claiming part of the rainbow just from me today. This signifies the first day of class. But knowing, being reminded with this conference today that our LGBTQI plus students are home, and their journey continues, maybe in a place that they didn't anticipate. So how, if the conversation takes us here today, our SAGA club, our SAGA student club, SAGA stands for Sexuality and Gender Alliance Club, has become a powerful force for our students. And we can talk about, I think, the elements that has made it a powerful force, but the importance of having a robust, active student life, student support system at a distance is going to become very, very important to us for our students to participate fully in that and create a virtual space. And the first things that we fire up on this campus, the first non-instructional space that we're trying to bring back online is our library, because it's a for Wi-Fi space. And, thinking about that today and the importance of not only for students who don't have reliable Wi-Fi access for their instructional needs, but for all students, but particularly LGBTQI students for purposes of this conversation, who need to form community, who might not be able to form that community safely from their home environment. We've got to keep pushing, and we have to be relentless in working together in our college community to not give up, despite all of the other challenges that we have before us right now. So thank you to my colleagues for inspiring these remarks.
I'm really struck, Chris, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, the challenges that students face in a virtual classroom, because if you're sharing an apartment with your family or you live in a small home, to be able to have those kinds of conversations, even in your very classroom, are challenging for LGBTQ students. And I'm also thinking a lot about the provision of mental health services. We've moved to pretty much mostly a telecounseling model, and we were able to serve students throughout the summer, throughout the spring through telecounseling. We'll still be having some, if needed, in person. But again, if you think of that student who's at home, to be able to have a counseling session to talk about the issues that they're trying to work through, again, when they can't be guaranteed some modicum of privacy, is a real challenge. And I have to say, I couldn't be more grateful for our student life staff, our res life staff, our counseling staff, who are trying so hard to try and create safe spaces wherever they can. And I'm also thinking, we follow the community college model in the spring, and we created some Wi-Fi parking lots for our campus. They weren't so well used, but I'm just thinking that was one safe space that a student could potentially use to have a telecounseling session. But these are so, when you think about the challenges that our students are facing when they're trying to come out, they're trying to assert their identity. This has just made a really complicated situation. And I'm thinking a lot about the depression and anxiety that our students face under normal circumstances, and then the exacerbation of that under COVID-19. And how can we make sure that we're sort of adding, because most of us can't just add counselors, but what are the other things that we're doing to try and reach out to students? And again, to make sure that they know that we care about them, where we hear them, we see them. We want to make sure that they have as much of what they need as we can possibly provide. And I think for all of us, that's a challenge, but I can't say how grateful I am for the really creative folks on our campuses who are trying so hard to create alternative ways for students to connect. One thing we did last spring was we called literally every single student just to see how are they doing, what's going on, what are the challenges, and then where we could, we would, if they were having academic challenges, we could send them to the Student Success Center. If they were having challenges around mental health, we could ask would they be open to a mental health counselor reaching out to them. But I think there are so many ways in which we are all trying to reach students, and I think that would actually be a really fruitful conversation as well. What are you doing to make sure that you're working closely with our students and addressing the real challenges.
Actually, there's a question in the Q&A, guys, that I think they're asking some of the same thing. How do we as faculty administrators help students without becoming patronizing? And how do we engage them in formulating and implementing programs and policies? So I want to make sure we saw that. And a couple things I would add to that, and give it back to my colleagues. I learned this from what we're calling the Do Better campaign with my students of color. And I just actually got off a meeting today with the faculty and staff of color, asking the same question too of them. One thing we started is with the value statements in terms of, I'm talking broader, and I'm not sure if the questioner was wanting something specific in terms of helping students individually. So maybe one of you can take that as I talk about a broader. And we're asking the community to re-own the value statements. And actually this administrative conference I've started, all policies and practices have to be filtered through the value statement so that we can learn. And it's so much not actually just reaching out to students, but I think our job as leaders, and then I think, Kristin, you went beautifully into talking about student affairs and the wellness center, is to make sure that at that level, there is a caring community and a culture that nourishes that. And I've been speaking a lot more than I thought I ever have, and it's going to put us into a comfort zone we're not crazy about. And some of the campaigns I've had to do to talk to students. So the best thing too, I think, is showing by example and role model in terms of what you are willing to talk about and engage. So when it came to talking about reaching out to my faculty of color, my faculty of color said, just call. We love to talk. We love to engage. We love to break bread together. And it could be things so simple that we're so scared or worried about, right? That's why I mentioned the idea of the politics and political. Either re-own the name and bring it down to that private and sector, or ignore it and move on, because there's so many aspects of these students' lives, whether it's health or Title IX, I'll say it again, or immigration. All of these policies intersect these students in so many ways. I don't think it's a single entity anymore either. I think there's so many entities and characteristics that our students are trying to find themselves. I think any way we approach them as they're ready to share more on those more vulnerable levels, I think the better. But I'm going to stop and allow to go deeper or, into more specifics.
There was another question, and I wanted to be able to answer this because we just did this. Can any of the presidents make a suggestion on how you elevate these issues to the administration? I've been trying to get the university to fix names for our trans students for almost 9 years, and it never seems to go anywhere. One of the things that I have found as a president, and I really appreciate with working with people, is to start looking at some of the groups that can help sponsor these types of policies. So we have a group on campus that was working on just this issue. And what I found was there was a lot of support for it. People were like, oh, that's a great idea, but nobody knew who owned that policy. And so finally we just said, let's sit down and write the policy. And so you've got to find people who will take some ownership around it. As in most institutions, everyone has a lot of work on their plate. And so it's sometimes really difficult to have somebody in, let's say, the president's office take it on. But this was taken on by our diversity committee, and the students were really behind it, which then we also pulled in members of the registrar's office and other folks who are record keepers and people who ran the ID systems and all those sorts of things that would be affected by a change in this policy. And once they started writing it, within a couple of months, our policy was in place and ready to go. We've had to adapt it and change it a few times as systems have changed. But I think it's really taking that ownership and someone coming forward and saying, here's a draft of a policy that we need in place, and knowing that students or one of your constituent groups are going to be working behind you. I think that your trans students especially would be wanting that to happen. And there are ways to make it happen, especially with some of the different student information systems. It's fairly easy to make happen.
I want to jump in on that because that's something that that took far longer on my campus than I would have ever thought possible. And I think the first thing is to listen to students, but then students are tired of just being heard. They want some action. I know on my campus, because of our arcane systems, it took a whole lot longer to actually implement the policy than I had hoped, but it is now live. I have a couple of thoughts on how to get your senior leadership to listen. And one thought is when your student government association takes up something like that, we take it very seriously. So your president is probably not going to be happy for me to suggest that, but that's one of those areas where students have a lot of power that they don't often realize. And I think the students working with the dean of students, working with others, supporters, whether it's the counseling services, can often provide some pressure. Faculty can also, and I will say that when our faculty senate was able to again make a resolution in support of our LGBTQ students, that can also be very powerful. So those are some thoughts on how to get some movement where movement isn't happening.
I would add to that, particularly the listening sessions, senior administrators can be asked to listen. And we just did another one with our students. And this is what one student said and looked right into all of us. We didn't show our faces so it'd make it easier on them, just our names. And he said, it's hard enough to learn, but if you have to hide your identity and worry about what people think about you, it shuts everything down completely. So we are building, and they want action steps. You're absolutely right, Kristin. And what we're doing is we actually are taking Maslow's hierarchy of needs and shrinking it to 3 levels, starting with safety and security, belonging, and then self-esteem and empowerment, and showing them how all will be happening at the same time. But what is the basic need that they have? They have to feel safe and secure. And then how do you get them to the sense of belonging, knowing that it will go back and forth? But unwilling participants and the administrators had to listen to students' voices, but to protect the students, they used allies to read their stories so that they, and those who felt that there would be fear of retribution, were able to speak through another student's voice. Listening is very powerful. It really is.
And there may be overlap here. It sounds like a lot of us are on a pathway right now of this conversation around grace and patience and flexibility, that none of us studied pandemic as a model for leadership. And Kristin, I think it was you who said with archaic information systems, of course, we want all of our students to be addressed with their preferred name at Suny Orange. And it seemed like so easy a request. And of our students and faculty who yes, they did capture, my attention. And I think the audience would understand that I would be incredibly supportive of that request, but not being able to deliver in a way that did not end up being a Rube Goldberg contraption that would fail repeatedly for faculty who might only be with us for a semester, who didn't read the 7 emails to be able to understand how to make it work until we could make it work permanently with an updated system. So I guess what I'm saying is, like so many other things, the conversation and the trust factor of the conversation going both ways of saying this is something that we want, but also in the other direction, if the trust exists, building the trust to say we want this too, but please understand it may outlive your tenure at this institution, but this may be imperfect, and please stick with us as we're trying to do the right thing on some of these issues, because unbelievably, while we can do amazing things with our phones, sometimes your universities cannot do amazing things with the computers that are behind the scenes on that issue and some others.
and to continue the conversation and trying to look at the next two questions, you have to watch every corner of your universe. Whether I had a student who said, I live in the Bronx where there's gunfire every day and I feel safer there than sometimes in town when I'm at school. But the other thing that was interesting that you have to take into account, and you've got to find moments and be open to moments you don't even expect to be the teachable moments. When I first came, and I just finished my 5th year, because I was openly gay president, many students felt comfortable and felt like they had an ally. And actually one student who is now an alum said to me, you know, President Terenzio, you really changed the culture. But what also happened was an underground started that was the underbelly of what I was trying to do, and very upset about it. And that was just me not pushing an agenda yet, but just showing people who I was. I'm saying that because you have to watch everything. And you're right, Kristine, the pandemic brought it out even more. You're gonna step on landmines. And I think the best thing in leadership right now is to say, there are landmines everywhere. And like we teased, you know, who's fluent in pandemic? And what the pandemic has done is turned everything upside down and showed and exposed the unequal inequalities, inequities, any word you want to use for many people, particularly for the students who want to go to college now, particularly. So the best advice too moving forward is do what feels right to you. Know that and try to be as open for every population. But I am not going to apologize to those students who think that it's not okay to be gay. I am not. And that's the hard part, is how do you then push an important agenda? And we did have an issue, actually, but that's for another day. And how to play both of those is very important. And somebody asked about communication. Say it at least 100 times, and then say it another 100 times. Oh, and by the way, say it another 100 times. And never show exhaustion. Always act that you're saying it for the first time. I've used video. You're going to hear everybody else. Video, email, going by, whatever it takes. Stopping in if you can. Team saying it. Communication cannot be understated at all. And don't show frustration. And if you think you have said it, then you're going to have to say it again. I'm going to turn it to my colleagues because I can see your heads nodding.
I'd like to touch upon the question about what advice would you give to a student affairs staff at underfunded institutions in conservative states? Having lived and worked in a very conservative state and worked in student affairs at the time, you know, one of the things that we had to do was, one, find things that we can do that didn't cost a lot of money. So there are ways that folks can gather. You could have just a drop-in group with folks. You can sign up for a room in your library or in your student center and just have people meet. The other part of this is also to get your students' voices. I think Kristin had said it earlier. Get the voices of the students out there and support what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Having been on a campus where there had been an assault, a hate crime on a gay man, and folks were saying, well, you know, this is what they deserve it, basically was the attitude. And knowing that we would get that feedback, but that the students were really pushing back. And whether it was with legislators or with faculty or staff members of the campus or community members, that they wanted to be in a safe environment. And I don't think anyone wants to stand up for violence and say that violence was okay. And so they really, I give the students a lot of credit, and you've got to embrace your students' voice and help them to find a place to share that voice. It doesn't have to cost money. It doesn't have to be a new position. I've been in places where folks have taken it on as a different aspect of their job because they believe in the work we're doing. And it's really important that folks can start looking at it, even in an administrative area. You don't want to lose students because of your climate. And some people may feel like, oh, it's okay to lose those kinds of students, but you're going to lose other students because of that environment. You never know, and folks have to understand they don't really know who their students are. And those, if people are really pushing back, they're clearly disengaged from the students' lives, and they need to better understand who our students are. You really have to have an environment that is embracing and welcoming to all students. And you need to get folks to understand that better.
I want to affirm that, because I've found that on my campus, people think that New York State is always liberal, but I live in a very small, rural, very conservative part of the state. And I will say that if faculty and staff and the campus community take as their first principle that students matter and that we're here to serve students, I found unlikely allies popping up to support our students. And so you may be surprised at the allies that you find that you hadn't expected, because they care about the welfare of their students. And if I could just share a quick story. We, before our preferred name policy was implemented, it was really difficult for students. Students' dead names would be showing up on their course rosters. And I found a faculty member who had never been involved with any LGBTQ issues before, didn't really know anything. All he knew was that his student was in pain. And he found a technical workaround, which we were able to use in our learning management system throughout until we got that fixed. And it wasn't because he was already an ally, it was because he saw a student in pain and he knew he had to fix it.
No one wants to tackle that third question?
You know, I will share that my life partner used to teach on a Jesuit campus, and they vary dramatically. And I think, again, in terms of where the allies are, and I think you've got to find those allies who care about students first and foremost, and then who are willing to wrap their arms around their students. But that's a tough one. But I will say that on some Jesuit campuses with which I'm familiar, there are allies. They just may be harder to find, but keep looking.
It is interesting how, and I don't know the answer, but I want to make sure that we at least give the question some more time. The religious tenets of the Jesuit college, I thought that was a little bit more open. And if folks are hiding behind the religious quotes, you can't come back with other religious quotes, right? Because usually, I don't know how that works with a give and take, but I think, Kristin, I think you've said it best. What are the value system statements? What are we saying about learning? What are the other things that are built into higher education and engagement of learning that is as important as whether somebody, is homophobic? That's what's going through my mind. I don't know. And I also am in a very highly rural conservative area. And as a matter of fact, when I first got here, there were cars driving around that had the word acronym LAC, Locals Against College Kids. And sometimes it's just figuring out how to educate people and understanding what the principles of the religious tenets of the college are, for example, or what does it mean to look at a human being? I don't know. But I just wanted to add more to that very challenging, important question.
And I'm seeing in the Q&A that our viewers can't actually see the question. So for those who are trying to figure out what question we were answering, somebody had asked what our advice was for working with folks on a Jesuit conservative campus, what ideas we might have.
I would like to add to that. I mean, part of the tenets of Jesuit faith is caring about people. And I really think going back to that and using it specifically within the context of caring and a supportive community, not addressing the issues, the bigger issues that they want to make an issue out of it, but how do they deal with the discrepancy. If their behavior is different from such that what they're supposed to believe in. And so I have found that Jesuit communities are actually better than some. And so I think that it's important that you look at that. And I think also where folks were saying, how do you find those allies? I mean, there are allies on every campus, and folks will help you with that. The whole idea of changing rooms and changing floors, which is part of the question, when students cite religious reason for changing rooms and floors, I don't think it's different from when we were talking about students who had a student of a different race or a different religion or ethnicity. Those are some of the same issues around how do we live and work together as a community? What are the definition of a community, and how can we support all members of our community? And so sexual orientation should not be one that is a reason for being able to move. When many years ago, when I worked in student housing, we used to put a moratorium on moving just for that reason, so that you had to wait 2 or 3 weeks before any room changes could take place, so that people couldn't look at their first impression. So it really was about learn about the person you're living with, and that you're people working together. And a lot of friendships came out of that. And students, and some people also learned they couldn't live together. So just because based on behavior. So I think it's important that you start looking at some of your policies that will support keeping students together as well.
How about the one, how do you personally stay sane amid the insanity of last year? I'm not going to answer them right now because I'm not sure I am.
I'll second that, but I spend a lot of time outside, and I'll be honest. Today is the first large move-in day of our students, and being among students really helps, because it keeps me focused on why we're doing this. We're doing this because we care about students. We want students to succeed. This is why we got into this, at least for me personally. I wanted to work with students and to help provide an environment in which students who didn't normally, maybe students who were not told from birth that their success path was college, can find that college is a great place for them and find that they can succeed there. So that helps more than anything else in this really, I usually say challenging, but it's really difficult and it's really hard. But seeing students succeed makes it so much worth it.
Yeah, I'll tag on to that. Today has been such a great day. Thank you, Suny Spectrum, for existing, like your icing on the cake. But it's such a milestone day to actually see students today for the first time on this campus since mid-March, and know that this is what we have been, building toward, having the students that we absolutely have to have on campus be here. The mantra for me for a long time is to say, with all the privilege I've had in life, if I can't figure out what's going on, how can these students who haven't had these opportunities yet, how can they figure it out? So we gotta plow through, and don't underestimate the power of having those humorous, funny people around you in your life. I used to not believe, like, weeding out the negative. That you always got to have different opinions in your life, right? You have to see the other point of view. You have to see the opposing point of view, but weed out the unconstructive opposing points of view from wherever you're getting your news and social media, and especially in your personal life, right? And surround yourself with people who are affirming and can laugh and find the absurdity in the moment, and that's where I've received my sanity. And you know what? Also, shutting it down. This went on. This has been constant. I will not lie. This has been constant. My colleagues are shaking their head violently at this point. This has been constant. But at least on say Friday night at 7, saying I'm giving myself from Friday night to 7 to, Sunday at 9 a.m. or something. Like, I am shutting this down. I'm just not going to look. They know how to find me if something completely falls apart, but I am not going to go looking for information about this college. And you just have to carve out some space. That's how I did it.
And I agree.
The board was today.
Yeah, I agree. My students were already a week into classes, and to see them, we took 7 days to get them in, to see their faces and to talk to the families. It reminds you what this is all about. I also think what was critically important, everything you've all said, right? But there are times too, I think you would all agree, that we were 7 days a week for a long time, even the weekends, to get planning and stuff. What kept me sane was to tend to the staff and to show compassion and empathy. And every time we got on a call to deal with some crazy something, we went around and said, how are you? What's going on with your family? And brought normalcy into that, to allow the staff to feel tired and to bring the humanness out. It really kept me very grounded, more than I thought. And you do have to replenish. There's no doubt about it. You got to look for the beauty. And Kristine, you said it well. Take the noise out. Like I said, everybody has a statement. Everybody has been experts in pandemic, and talk about a sense of humor. I have gone around, and my staff has too, and said, nice to know you're such an expert in pandemic. Why don't you please tell me more about your thinking or whatever? The humor of this. And to realize that if you don't do it, if we don't do it, who is? What leaders, all of us are challenged. How are we? Somebody has to do it. And I said to my staff and students, I feel privileged, as weird as it sounds, to be a leader at this time. I feel privileged because I know with my team, we can see the end of the rainbow on this.
I saw a handful of other questions. One is, what new initiatives do we have and how do we support our LGBTQ students of color? And then how are we dealing with the tensions and issues as they arise and move through the election? So I'm going to start with some new initiatives. One of the things that we learned as we surveyed our students and we looked at their mental health concerns, in this very rural white part of the state, we did not have a single person of color on our counseling staff. So we're working to find telecounseling services for students of color so that they are more likely to have somebody who can at least understand to a greater extent. So that's something that we've been working on, trying to expand our reach beyond our region. And I don't know what other initiatives folks are working on.
This year, we have dedicated our entire year to anti-racist training, and that will be providing training from all different aspects of the campus, classroom, out of classroom, faculty and staff, students. One of the things, this is also a fairly white and homogeneous population that our community is, although our student body is not. But really looking at ways that especially the white population can begin those conversations. All too often that has been put onto the people of color to lead those discussions, and really providing the tools that are necessary for us to have a healthier environment. We will be talking about race and gender and violence and all those things that are incredibly uncomfortable for communities to address, but knowing that that is a commitment from the entire institution moving forward. And that will be our sort of theme for the year, is one of the things we're really trying to get ahead of. And that I think also embraces the inevitable issues that will come out of the election season.
I'll share that I first in an email over the summer to our employees, and then I just said it last week in a welcome it back address, and I'll find a way to say it to our students as well. I think one of my realizations has been maybe I was coasting a bit, candidly, friends, saying like, hey, I have this identity as a gay woman. and maybe coasting in thinking that maybe I understood the experiences of our students and employees of color. Maybe took a little more credit for, having been excluded or feeling, I've been treated differently and so forth through time in my life. And this summer, like really coming to terms with like, no, you don't understand that at all, young. And so I've been very open with my college community that to set the tone for this year, that is, I'm being open about my shortcoming and hoping that inspires our college community to do the same. If you're not familiar with Orange County, we're about 60 miles north of Manhattan. And our student body, we are now a Hispanic serving institution for the past 2 years. We are probably about 51%, our student body probably identifies now as students of color, but our faculty and staff do not match that at all. So there's a dissonance, and so it's an all-campus challenge. And our Global Studies Department has really picked up this call in the past several weeks and is doing some just simply incredible programming that they've announced. And so this is what we're doing as a college community this year. I'm looking very forward in the midst of a pandemic that this is something that we're doing to kind of crosswalk all of these things toward each other.
I'll jump in with some other initiatives that we're working on, because I am very concerned about the run up to the election, especially for those of you who don't know where Potsdam is. We're about 20 miles south of the Canadian border in the largest, one of the most rural parts of New York State. We've been working for a couple of years on a deliberative dialogue project with an organization called Celia. And so 50 of our incoming first-year students did this as a pilot to try and develop these hard questions, really to develop the tools to have those hard conversations about identity, about race, about the things that they don't often get a chance to have a conversation about in a facilitated way. And then we're rolling that out to the rest of the first-year students over the course of the year. And that's been really important. But in our part of the world, we're also having a lot of challenges around, really thinking about the safety of our students. And as our students, about a third of whom come from urban areas, and about a third of whom are students of color, as they come up into this environment, we have to remember that they are coming from some of the most segregated schools in the United States. And so their experiencing of policing is very different. So we're doing a lot of work around thinking about community-oriented policing and really thinking about how do we make sure that when students come up to our area and then live in our area, they feel safe, and in addition to being safe. And then finally, we've developed a whole new series of workshops called How Inclusive is Your Space? Inviting parts of our campus to really reflect on what is it that students see when they come into our, the various areas? How are we embracing students? So we've got a whole lot going on, but I will admit that I am concerned about how things are going to shape out as we head towards the election. It's going to be very difficult, especially for those who are on public campuses. And we need to really think about people's right to say, people's First Amendment rights to say things that are offensive. And how are we going to engage folks in conversation about the impact of that speech? And that, I think, is going to be a challenge for all of us.
Kristin, you have a question about your program. Do you have more information on how you've implemented How Inclusive is Your Space? So they're asking for more information.
That is just going to be rolling out in this fall, so I'll have more information shortly. So folks can contact me, and as that gets rolling, I'll have more on that.
At Cobleskill, we've started the Do Better campaign, and Kristine, thank you for sharing. I did the same thing today with my faculty of color. I had a safety zone when I first got here for LGBTQI and students of color so they can come and talk to me and not feel fearful. And we recognize the Black Greek associations, which made a difference. And then I took my eye off the prize. I did say that today, and it's a powerful commentary that you just said, and to do that, and how many leaders are willing to do that. So I applaud you. And I think that shows for leaders of college campuses, it is very important to show all sides, right? It's important to say when you've done something well or not well, and to own it. So my students were talking to me the other night. They said, we're not angry with you, President Terenzio. We don't want to put a target on your back. I said, put it, please do. And talked about that. I said, I have to own that, whether you think it was me or not. And the humility you need in these jobs is remarkable. And the other thing, and I know there are a bunch of other questions, but the one thing I do want to share that I think matters with most of the questions, we have shared governance in higher education. And I don't think people realize what a major tool that can be. How to share the decisions, how to embrace the voices and decision makers you have on campus, including students. We've also started a coalition with the village, and actually they're meeting tomorrow to talk about shared governance and the village and the issues of our students and being treated well out there. But it's important as a leader to understand the role we all have. The buck stops with all of us. However, how we get there is critically important. And if you want to make any kind of change, this is the hardest part, is how not to cut anybody off. Even the ones that, that they call it the naysayers, right? You've got to understand how to listen. And you said it well too, Kristine, to say, and then when you turn it off. But we don't have enough time to talk more about what I mean. But the shared governance model, do not underestimate the power of shared governance in higher education. It exists nowhere else. It does not exist in the private sector. It does exist in making change, however. So.
I just looked at the questions and thanks for the shout out to the Crane School. And does that seem to affect, we are an art school, and in all of the Suny survey data, we have, as best I can tell, the largest proportion of LGBTQ students in the system, as best I can tell. Anywhere between 20 to 25% to upwards of a third identify in some way as LGBTQ, depending on which survey. So I do think that provides safety in numbers, but it also means that students don't always organize because there's always the thought that somebody else might do that. So some years we've had a very powerful Gender and Sexuality Alliance. Other years it's waned a bit. So for us, it means always trying to be attentive and always trying to make sure that we're supporting students who want to be activists. I also want to talk directly about the concerns about specifically Black students, LGBTQ students, but also non-LGBTQ students because of the concerns of police violence in the city. This in our region has been something we've been very, very deeply concerned about. There are 4 colleges in my region, and all summer we've been working very closely. The presidents have been meeting every other week. The chief diversity officers have been meeting with local law enforcement to try and help them understand the concerns that students have and family members have when they come into our community. I've been meeting very closely with our Black Faculty Caucus and our Black Student Alliance, but those fears are real, especially as students come up through the Adirondacks in places where they lose their cell phone service. We've been working very, very hard to try and help our law enforcement officers understand the students' perspective. understand that when our students come into an encounter with them, they have a very different experience that they bring to that encounter. And I will share with you that that's very critical work. It's important work. It's urgent work. And it's work that is going to be ongoing for a long time, especially, I mean, I can say in my region and for the 4 campuses in our area, and my campus especially. You know, I'm wondering if any of my colleagues have thoughts on how to help LGBTQ students work with, feel comfortable with Title IX officers. I would love to hear, if you have thoughts on that, I'd actually love to hear them.
I believe that there'll be some sessions that it'll be talked about the new Title IX policies as well as Title IX training. Elizabeth or Joe may be able to answer that about some of the other programs coming up over the next couple of days.
I'll admit that I'm just so concerned that students will be so unwilling to report sexual assault more generally under these new regulations. I am very concerned that students will feel that with the new regulations, it won't be worth it to them. So we're really going to have to wrap our arms around 2 things. One is sexual assault prevention, so that it's less likely. But then how do we provide services for students who don't feel comfortable pressing forward with a case? So those are the 2 things that I'm thinking a lot about.
The question that was asked was, how can Title IX officers better support LGBTQ plus students with so many students afraid to approach the Title IX coordinators? With the changes that we've all seen, we have those fears. We don't know how it's going to play out with students, or if they will continue to report at the same levels, or if they'll want to keep things quiet, or, you know, even going back to the whole pandemic, what will students come back having reported having situations when they were away from campus as well, and coming back with that trauma, and what they are willing and able to do about that when they get back to campus.
Joe's answer too, that we're going to close with the Title IX panel, Joe. Well, one is that to cover the detail from the legal side. Joe or Elizabeth, you want to give us more?
I'm seeing from Joe that they're going to close with a 9-on-9 panel to deal with the legal side. You know, I think.
Okay, go ahead.
One of the issues is making sure that colleges grapple with this. I think the question is, what do you do if your college isn't really grappling with the issue of Title IX and sexual assault? What do you do? And I think this is where staff and faculty and students can keep administrators accountable through all the means we've talked about earlier. But we have to, if we're all serious about supporting our students, it's very hard to learn when you've been sexually assaulted. It's very hard to learn when you're going through that painful process of understanding what happened to you and then what's next. And colleges, we have to hold ourselves accountable. So I think that's what I would say. And if you find yourself in a campus that's having difficulty finding yourselves accountable, using allies in student life, using allies among the faculty senate to help campuses become more accountable in the ways that they need to be.
I think it also, you've said it, and I'm sure the panel, 9 attorneys covering Title IX will help. And that's always like at the end, right? So what do you have to do at the beginning, and the kind of culture that you set up and start, whether we use peer mentors, we use everything we can, even we're connecting with the community actually on this. What are the value statements? What do we stand for? Because if we only wait for Title IX to be that only arm of this, Title IX isn't going to work either, because the students they have to feel safe. They have to understand that there are people there for them to be able to relate to and talk to. And don't forget, as a student said to me, not just with Title IX, a young man of color the other night said, you know, I can't change who I am. I walk down the street and they clutch their purses. If you don't do what you need to do, I will leave the college more unsure of myself, haven't learned a blessed thing, and broken. If you don't help figure out how to allow us to flourish and to understand what we do tolerate, to Kristin's point about accountability.
You know, I'm also seeing a question in there on how to support pre-service teachers who experience misgendering, for example. And I think that's an issue for pre-service teachers. It's an issue for students going out onto internships. And frankly, it's often an issue in our classrooms and our families. And I'm speaking now as a parent of a trans student and a young trans person, because I know that using people's correct pronouns is a difficult shift for older folks. But I think as a campus, there are a couple of things that we can do. One is that we can insist that our faculty and staff use the correct pronouns. And part of that is, you know, when you think about how inclusive is your space, part of that is asking, you know, as you're thinking about whether it's sending interns out, whether it's sending pre-service teachers out, have you prepared those faculty and staff who are working with the students? Have you prepared them for understanding the lived realities of their students? And then when all else fails, because I also understand that there are some on our campuses who frankly don't believe that that transgender students exist, and that students whose choice of pronoun is they, them exist. There are bias response teams. We have a fairly robust bias incidents response team. Our chief diversity officer, if a bias incident is reported, and on my campus, we would consider that a bias incident. Our chief diversity officer would go and have a conversation with the faculty member so that they could understand that the impact that they had. But this, I'll admit that this is an ongoing challenge, and you can see clearly how deeply it wounds students when they are misgendered.
In speaking to that too, I think it's also important for folks to be given permission to make mistakes around it. And that some of us even role model some of those mistakes, so that we are looking at creating a safe environment where we can talk about these things. And so how do you confront it, and how does it make them feel? And it goes actually back to your original point, Kristin, when you talked about the person who saw a student in pain. And so when a student feels like either their dead name is used or they're misgendered, that they're not being honored, and to know that they need to be honored as who they are and what their identity is. And so I think when people start to understand that a little bit, but we may make mistakes. We may not use them or they, and try to use another pronoun at some point. But we're all learning, and we'll learn to better utilize that.
You know, and I think ultimately, if we're faced with a situation where a faculty member simply refuses to use the student's appropriate name and pronouns, we need to find an alternative learning experience for that student, because that student can't learn in that classroom.
Absolutely.
And I think as leaders, that's one of the expectations we can make, that if a student is in a situation and they don't feel safe, they don't feel valued, they don't feel recognized, we have to work to try and create a situation in which they can learn. That being said, when we're working with our K-12 partners, we've got to do some work with our K-12 partners as well, so that they can understand the students that they're receiving, or the intern who's going out into a particular setting. We also have to help them understand that this is part of who we are as a campus community. These are our students, and this is our expectation for the treatment of our students as they go out into the community. And our campus has actually been asked to come in and do some workshops with local schools, very rural schools, around LGBTQ issues. So we also are trying to serve as a resource for our region, so that teachers, administrators, and others have more tools in their toolkit than they might have had around valuing and affirming LGBTQ students, both their own K-12 and any pre-service teachers they may receive from us.
Going back to the point you were just making, Kristin, on these are issues that get in the way of learning. This is what that's the language we need to use in our policies and procedures. If we're creating barriers that are stopping or preventing or creating areas that aren't allowing students to grow to their fullest and learn in the classroom, we need to intervene. And that's where these policies come into play. So going back to kind of the original question that started some of this was, around the name change policy. Why do you need a name change? Because students aren't able to learn. It's that clear. Once you start approaching issues in that way, people will start to understand it a little bit better, I would hope, because I think it's tough to argue that that's something that's getting in someone's way, and we have a responsibility to deliver education and to remove those barriers. And so that, I think, is a great way to lead into policy change and procedure change.
Thank you so much to the four of you for a really enriching conversation. I wanted to hop back on because we're just about at time, but we definitely wanted to say thank you so much for being so generous with your time and insights. I know that I learned a lot during this session. And of course, thank you to Elizabeth Cronin from the New York State Office of Victim Services and Sandra Casey for joining us as well. Thank you to my Spectrum partner in crime, Joseph Storch, who is on screen with us as well. And we also, in addition to reminding folks to come back at 4 o'clock for our next session, we were excited to announce that we received the email during this session that on Marsha P. Johnson's birthday today, the first state park in New York State was renamed in honor of an LGBTQ person and a person of color at that. So really, really exciting news and an excellent way to kind of close out the session. So thank you so much to the four of you, and thank you to everyone for joining us for this session, and we will see you all soon.